It's not about just being lazy. It's about saying, what is the right and best way to do the work that you came here to do?
And she has never missed a week of her walking since she's been doing that.
It's not your fault if you inherited unhelpful habits or unproductive habits, but it is your responsibility to try to figure out how to adjust those and how to improve those in some meaningful way.
The challenge, I think, is to treat competing priorities as somehow equally valuable. It's where you start to say it's all essential, it's all important, it's all a priority. I mean, this is one of my favorite little sort of tidbits of research, but the word priority came into the English language in the 1400s. And according to Peter Drucker, it stayed singular for the next 500 years. So it wasn't until the Industrial Revolution where people started speaking with, no sense of irony at all, saying, here are my 34 priorities. And they all have to be done now or even yesterday. And so that shift in our language, I think, illustrates a weakness in our thinking and our logic that says, look, if I can just fit it all in, somehow I can have it all. If I treat everything as important, then it will all work out. And in fact, life isn't even close to, that doesn't approximate reality at all. What is far closer to reality is that a few things are essential and almost everything is trivial noise. And so it's more like waking up, you've spent your whole life thinking you were in a, and I don't say this in any way disparaging, but you think you're in a coal mine, and you've lived your life in that way. It's just productivity, get more stuff done. And then you wake up and you say, I've never been in a coal mine. It's all the time. It's been a diamond mine. And so actually my whole job is different than I thought it was. The whole job of life is different. It is to actually explore what is essential, find those diamonds. That's the most important thing. All the rest doesn't matter. Find those things, invest in them, protect those things. And we know that this approximates reality because when people look from anything like a long-term perspective, they recognize that only a few things mattered. At the very end of people's lives, when they're looking at the totality of their life, they don't say, oh my goodness, I wish I'd spent more time on email. Oh, I wish I'd spent more time, on social media and so on. And no one thinks that. No one says that. They can see with a bit more perspective, a few things mattered. And I lost that perspective in that moment, and in an attempt to try and just sort of keep everyone happy and deal with all those pressures. So it's the job of life is to figure out the essential few, to eliminate the non-essential, and then to make it and design it so that the essential things happen as automatically and as easily as possible, so that you don't have to use extraordinary or superhuman effort to make sure you remember the essential things and do them. You want the default to be the essential things.
As I think about your work and, where do I see people commenting on this on social media? A lot of it has been people in the business world or the productivity world. But I actually think your work goes far beyond that, because what you're asking, what you're writing about, are fundamentally existential human questions. And actually, I think there's almost a spiritual undertone. I think that on one level, you need self-awareness to be able to apply the principles in your books. But at the same time, I think simply by applying those principles in your life is going to give you a lot of self-awareness. So I think it works both ways. And, I can't help shake the feeling that these principles are going to be just as relevant for, let's say a single mum in her life, trying to bring up her children, trying to make ends meet. Maybe there's a lot of struggle in her life. I think these principles could really help her as well. So, I'd love to understand your perspective on this.
Well, I don't feel like either books I'm asking a business question. I'm asking a human question. And I also think those human questions are relevant to businesses, because all businesses are just humans trying to figure out how to serve other humans. So, it applies there as well. But I think it really is human first questions, as you say. And I actually do think that that a deeper reading of Essentialism and Effortless is about your spiritual life and about what is guiding you. As a friend of mine put it, are you being led by your scared self or your sacred self? The scared self will tend to operate in a certain way, endlessly the fear of missing out and what other people are doing and competing and comparing and living in that state. But the sacred self will guide you differently. And so asking better questions will help reveal better answers. I'm thinking now of somebody, of a working mum in England who reached out to tell me her story. So she, after reading, some of the stuff I'd written, started asking this question every day: what is the most important thing I need to do today? That's it, simple question. But she asked it every day. She wrote it up and she asked it every day. At first, the answers she got were to do with the business that she was trying to run. Which key client to work with, what project was due, and so on. But over time, the answers evolved as she evolved.
Yeah.
And it became, self-care. You need to sleep better because you're not sleeping enough. You're not protecting yourself. You are burning yourself out. But then one day she gets a call from her dad, and he said, look, nothing to alarm you here. Mum's in the hospital again. It's nothing serious. Just wanted to keep you in the loop. And she said in that moment, as she asked the question that day, she knew exactly what the answer was. It was so clear to her. It was almost like time stood still, and she remembers the weather and the room she was in, and she just knew she had to go to the hospital that day. That was the priority.
Yeah. And
so she did. Now that's like a 2-hour drive. So she's really committing the rest of her day to this. It's not a completely trivial, I'll just go across the street for 10 minutes thing. And she goes and she sees her mum. She says, "Mum, I love you. I'm glad to be here." Mother says, "Oh, I love you too." An hour after that conversation, her mother falls into a coma. And very unfortunately, never recovers from that. A week later, Joe has the unfortunate job of turning off the life support machine. And she reached out to me, just wrote to me to tell the story, because she said, if I had not been an essentialist that day, how differently things would have worked out. I wouldn't have had that moment. I would have missed that, and for something inane. And so that was, to me, a very encouraging moment, because, I felt like, I can't change the hospital moment, but for her, she was able to make a better trade-off. And so as people ask better questions, as they change and evolve, the answers will change and evolve. And so I do think that essentialism and now effortless can help people go in different levels when they're ready, as they're ready. And that's what I'm going for. It's beyond just business.
I guess it's like any skill. The more you do it, especially if you're intentional each time you do it, you're getting better at it. So the question you may ask yourself on Monday of, the first Monday of 2020, the first Monday of 2021, you are going to be a much better skilled person at answering that same question if you've been practicing it. So, obviously, Greg, you have written these two wonderful books. What is the most essential thing for you to do in any given day?
That does change from day to day, because what matters is what's important now. And that's a nice acronym, I think. The acronym is WIN. What you've got to win this day. And that means getting clear each day. And it does change it depending on the circumstances. Today in this conversation, the most important thing today is my relationship with my wife, Anna. And maybe that should be true every day, but it feels true today. There's lots of things going on, and making sure that today I actually create enough space for us to go on a walk. We don't do that every day. Sometimes through the pandemic, we got to the point where it was pretty much every day, and it really mattered. No agenda, just listening, sharing, talking, and that became a really important practice. But when that isn't happening every day, it doesn't work as well. And so to me, that would be the priority today. So that, again, doesn't mean that it's the only thing you do today or the only thing I need to do. It's not my only responsibility. But knowing that at the beginning of the day means that I can try to, design the day differently. When the trade-offs come up, I can make the trade-offs differently. And so that would be my answer today. That isn't the answer every day, but it is today.
What I love about that answer, Greg, is there's a flexibility within it. There's not this kind of rigidity that we can then feel chained to that answer. Oh, I said the most essential thing was for me to meditate for 20 minutes every day, but today I don't have time and I can't do it. I think sometimes when we are trying to better our lives and better ourselves, we can go to these extremes. I certainly know I've been guilty of that in the past. And it's something I feel I'm sort of evolving in my own practice of prioritization, of essentialism, of self-care, is actually, you know what? I feel I can change things from day to day depending on what my needs are on any given day. So I really like that flexibility that's sort of built into the way you answered that.
Well, I've been on this 7-year listening tour. It's been the most extraordinary opportunity to listen to people, literally the world over, talk to me about what is essential for them and what the challenges are for them to live that in practice. And one of the things that has been like an endless theme is the assumption that the essential things not even have to be, the essential things are the very hardest things to do. And I've found that a little confusing at times, especially when I've heard it so often, because what it feels like people are doing is they're taking essentialism and they're saying, well, I need to be a perfectionist about it. And I'm like, well, that doesn't sound like a very essentialist way to become an essentialist. But it's like they've got this new language, this new, relatively new idea to them. And then they're bringing a bunch of old ideas to how to change to it. Yeah. In fact, one person told me one day, they said, I loved essentialism, but it should come with a warning. This will be the hardest thing that you will ever do. And it really, especially in hindsight, I listen to that and I think, that just means we're going about it wrong. There's a different way to do this. So even after somebody says, I'm really committed now to pursue what matters most in my life, you've got to, it's literally now, I see it as equally important to say, well, what's the right way to do it? Yeah. If you try to do the essential things, the right things, but do them in the wrong way, you'll still be burned out. You'll still be discouraged, and maybe even more discouraged than before, because you're so aware of all the gap between where you are and where you want to be and what's essential and what's not essential. And so when I now think about essentialism, I'm thinking of it as a lifestyle, a way of living, a way of being. And so the way we do it really matters, and being careful not to beat ourselves up because we haven't achieved some idealistic state that we've identified for ourselves immediately. It is important. The courage to be rubbish, for example, is something that I now hold as quite sacred in its own right. The idea of like, oh, I'm going to be an essentialist in some mistake-free way. I'm going to just be perfect at this. What a nonsense. What an unhelpful idea. What a way to exhaust yourself, depress yourself, even in the act of trying to be better. And so if you can get out of that and say, how could it be easier? Is there a gentler way to pursue the things that are essential? What if I could get out of the no pain, no gain mantra?
That idea that you've prioritized what's important in your life, but you're going about it the wrong way. I think it's very novel. It's very fresh. I mean, it's one of the core ideas, I think, that certainly I gleaned from your new book, Effortless. Is that, the way you do it is just as important as the prioritization. Do you hear that this gets misunderstood? And have you got any examples of people who have prioritized, but they've gone about their priority in the wrong way?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. This is it. When I say it's what I hear from people, I don't mean like, oh, every so often I hear it from people. I hear it all the time, absolutely all the time, but not in the way it might sound like I'm saying. It's not like people explicitly just say, yes, I tried to prioritize, but I'm doing it the wrong way, or I tried to prioritize and it's just so hard. It's not even that. It's like this. It's like I just started a new, asked to be on a committee, and the person who was initiating this group said, is their concluding speech as they were launching this thing, they just said, now this is so important what we're doing. This could help millions of youth around the world. This could just be so beneficial. It's going to be hard. I mean, it's going to be really hard, but it's going to be worth it. And that, no one challenged it. Nobody said anything about it. I've heard those speeches and conversations like it everywhere. It's everywhere. It's like embedded as a dominant assumption that's just invisible to people. People just believe the essential stuff is the hard stuff. The trivial stuff is the easy stuff. And those are your options. I was just talking to somebody who's trained in the military. I mean, this yesterday or day before. And when he was being trained in the military, one of his, leaders said to him, listen, you can either do it the easy way, which is the wrong way, or you can do it the hard way, and that's the right way. It was like these two options. Well, it's a false dichotomy. Of course, there are times that the right way is the hard way, and the easy way is the wrong way. Of course, that can be true. But is it not possible there's a third alternative? What would it mean? What would it mean if you could find a way to make the most essential things in your life the easiest things?
Yeah.
Or at least just so much more doable than they were in the past. The consequence would change everything. It does change everything, because suddenly you'll do it and you'll do it consistently, because it isn't so costly to take that path.
Yeah, I mean, not only is it going to be more enjoyable to experience life on a day-to-day basis if it feels easy or effortless, but it's also going to be more effective. I know we have a mutual friend in BJ Fogg. I know BJ was on your podcast recently. And, me and BJ have had multiple conversations about this, about, you make something easy, people will do it. So in terms of habit change, we want to make things that we want to do easy. And you were kind of saying a very similar thing in a slightly different arena, that whatever the essential thing is in your life, if you can make it easier and feel effortless, it's much more likely that you're going to do the thing that you've already identified is the priority thing for you to do. Totally.
What happens is that people identify what is essential. They know most people have a sense, at least, even if they haven't been very clear about it, and maybe they ought to be, but they have a sense of the things that are really important that they're not getting to. And they just are in this endless loop. They just think about that essential thing. They feel guilty about it. It overwhelms them. So then they just jump into the dark playground of social media, of TV, of something else that's trivial and appears easy to them. And they just jump back and forth between those two things. They intermittently do the thing that's essential. It's too hard, it's too much, it just exhausts them, it overwhelms them, and then they jump back into something else. And this can happen sometimes, multiple times on the same day, but often what I find is that people they start to, and it reinforces, by the way, the sensation, the belief rather, that the essential thing must be incredibly hard, because why else aren't I doing it? Exercise must be hard. How many people have I talked to about exercise who like, I tried to take up running and every so often I go back to it. Well, do you love running? No, I hate running. I hate it, but I have to do it. Well, Why don't we just find a different way? What if there's something else that you like to do? You like swimming? Oh, I like swimming. Well, let's do that then. Like, let's find let's not distrust the easy.
This idea of effortless, and that the things that we love, the things that we want to do can feel easy and effortless, really is a narrative that is swimming against the tide of the common popular, I was going to say Western narrative, but I think it's everywhere. That narrative that anything good has to be hard. What is it? Nothing good comes easy. You'll never get anywhere in life if you don't work hard. Right? We're sort of surrounded by this. I mean, you've got kids. Your kids are a bit older than my kids. Mine are currently sort of 10 and 8. But even at that age, you see this kind of narrative being, I don't think with any malice. It's I think everyone feels that that's the way to succeed in life. You have to work hard, and I'm not sure you're not saying you don't need to work hard. In fact, what are you saying? For people who might sort of misinterpret that, what are you saying? Because you're not saying never work hard, are you?
Well, I believe in work, and I have 4 children, aged 18 to 12, and of course we want them to work. We want them to be productive. We want them to take initiative. We value that. We don't want them to be spoiled. All of those things are real, and our children have many responsibilities in our home. But let's give an example. So, we have a whole series of rituals around eating together. Not maybe every night, but most nights. And so we'll raise a glass to each other kind of experience. We'll cheer each other on. A lot of fun in those conversations. But our trouble happens afterwards, which is the dinner cleanup. Well, what do you do now? That my children are just like silent ninjas. They're just gone. I'll turn around and all 4 of them have quietly slipped off to a room to whatever. And then my job is cat and mouse trying to get them back to do the cleanup. And so basically this is a chore. Now, how do you handle that? What do you do? You can say, well, look, life is hard and you just have to do the hard things. And that's one approach. And that is a speech that I have definitely had. But what if you could change the experience? What if you could turn it into a ritual? A ritual is a little different than a habit. A ritual is like a habit with a soul. A habit is like what you do. A ritual is how you do it. And so we said, okay, well, at first I said, well, we'll try and make it effortless by dividing up responsibilities really clearly. What does done look like? For the cleanup in the kitchen. Okay, that matters. Dividing up roles and responsibilities. Who is doing what? That mattered. But really, it wasn't until one of my children, my eldest daughter, added music. She just put on basically karaoke music loud in the kitchen. And that just was the tipping point moment. So as soon as and even now, if we forget that ingredient, it just is back to drudgery. It's back to it's important, but it's hard. And now, as soon as someone puts on the right music, it just changes it. Someone starts singing, and the feeling changes, and people want to be there, and they want to be part of the little party, and the work gets done. That to me is an illustration of the difference here. So what if you didn't just have to endure the essentials? Oh, it's just harder, just push and so on, and relentless. What if you could enjoy it? What if you can make it into something that the experience of life is better? Then the important things get done, and you've built relationships rather than burned them down a bit.
Yeah, it reminds me of one of the things I love to do on Sunday afternoons at the moment, which is make butternut squash soup. Now, it's something my wife taught me her recipe a few months ago. I love making it. I love the process, but what happens on a Sunday afternoon is that I'm like, okay, cool. This is going to take a couple of hours from start to finish. And so I will put on one of my favorite CDs. I'm still pretty old school. I've got a CD player where I choose an album that I really want to listen to.
I love it.
I put it on. I clean up the kitchen. I sort of go through the various stages, put the butternut squash in the oven, get everything. And I love those 2 hours.
Mm.
Right? Those 2 hours on a Sunday have been transformed. Now, I could have looked at it, oh man, I've got to cook this for the family. I've got to prepare it. What a hassle. But actually, I get to actually enjoy one of my favorite albums every Sunday afternoon in peace. And I get to, and it's the same thing. It's like you guys clearing up after dinner. It's the same, technical thing that you're doing, but the flavor of that experience is completely different.
Listening to you share that, the way that your body language, the energy talking about it, you are literally describing a ritual. Like I know that you get it in that experience. It's not duty. Yeah, there's a duty to it. You're cooking for your family. You're cooking something healthy for them. Like of course, it's essential in that sense. But the experience has changed. It's something you look forward to doing. It's something you want to do now. It's part of a routine that actually, the experience of doing it gives to you. It's not just the output. The experience itself is better. You reduced the space between the lag indicator, the thing you want, and the experience itself. If you can reduce that space, then you're far more likely to continue doing it, week in and week out. And what a difference that is if you could be consistent in it. What a difference that makes to the family culture. Once you've done it 10 times, 100 times, this becomes part of their experience. The children growing up, seeing you doing it, seeing you enjoying it, and learning that lesson too. I love it.
As a medical doctor, I think about your work, Greg, and I feel it has incredible relevance to health. Even though that may not be explicitly obvious from the outside to some people, I think there is such relevance to health because there is no question in my mind that stress is the number one factor that drives people in to see me. In some ways, stress is related to a good 90%, 80 to 90% of what I see. You can make a case that stress is impacting people's health, their well-being, so they end up at my door, whether that's, anxiety, mood problems, insomnia, feeling low about their life, relationship problems. I actually genuinely believe and have seen that if people can apply these principles to prioritize their life, I think the benefits are incredible. Yes, for their productivity, yes, for their relationships, but also for their health. Is this something that you've been asked about a lot? Have you seen the impact on people's health? And I'm just interested, has this been reported back to you as well? Because this is not just about productivity. No way.
Yeah, I actually don't even think about what I do as productivity at all. Sometimes it's put in that category. Amazon will put it in that category, and I have no control over that. And it's not like I lose a lot of sleep over that or anything, but I just don't think about this work that way. Essentialism is about not doing more things. That's productivity. It's about doing more of the right things. And effortless is about doing them in the right way so that you can create an experience in life, a lifestyle that really works for you. I got a note from someone who'd read my stuff, and she sent a photograph of herself before and after. I'd actually never seen anyone do this because, again, it's not like a weight loss book or that's not, it's not that kind of approach. But this was in the first picture, she looked like on death's door. I can't really even do this justice without just having it shown. Maybe you put it in the show notes or something.
Well, we can do for sure.
Yeah, perfect. We'll do it. The before and after of her, it's like a different person. And so that's, I'm writing for her.
Yeah.
I'm writing for somebody who is just, they're highly engaged, they're motivated, they want to work. Those aren't the issues. It's just that they've thought that life has to be done a certain way. Another story, a woman who is a manager at a university, at Brigham Young University, and she is She is the type of person who's up till 4 a.m. in the morning, photoshopping for her youth class at church the next day. She feels guilty if she eats lunch. Not if she takes time away for lunch. If she even eats it, she feels guilty. But she definitely believes, and wrote to me to say so, that she feels if she's not exhausted, she is not doing enough. And so I was trying to work out, look, how to help her. What can I do? What's the path forward? Because again, you don't want to give a prescription that's so overwhelming that you add to the problem. As I said, look, what I want you to do is basically invert your whole life using one question. I want you just to forget, don't worry about all the hundreds of things you could do or maybe do, just one thing, a question, a new question. I said, just ask the next time someone asks you to do something, the next time you take on a project, just say, how could this be effortless? What is the simplest way to do this? What if I stripped away any sort of extra expectations I'm putting on it? What would it look like? So she gets a call from a university professor, says, I'd love you to get your videography team to come here and record my class for the semester. And she is just ready to jump in. I mean, she is such a well-oiled machine with this. She's ready to overachieve, over-engineer it, make it happen. I'm going to wow him. That's sort of what she's thinking. I'm going to get a whole team of people there. We'll have multiple camera angles. We'll edit the whole thing together. We'll have music. We'll have graphics spliced into the whole video. Every time we'll have intros, outros, all of it. And then she remembers, okay, the coaching, invert, always invert. Let's have a new question. Okay, how could this be effortless? So she starts talking to him about it. Well, what's the easiest solution to this? It turns out it's for one student who's going to miss a few classes for athletic commitments. So the solution they come up with together is that another student in the class will just video it on their phone and just send it to them on whatever class they happen to miss. The professor had not thought of that solution and was delighted to come up with something that was so easy for him to have to navigate. He didn't want to have to coordinate with a whole videography team. He just wants to solve this problem.
Yeah.
And so he's happy. And she gets off the phone. It's been a 10-minute conversation that saved her 4 months of headache. And that was like a game changer for her. She said, what if it's not a motive problem? What if it's not a work ethic problem? What if it's just a mindset problem?
Yeah.
I'm just overcomplicating, overthinking, being too much of a perfectionist. And this is producing stress to a level that is affecting the whole experience and health of my life.
That question, what would it look like if it was effortless? But also it's that earlier question about, what does done look like, right? Because by really intentionally understanding, well, what is the goal of this project? What problem does it need to solve? Then you find that actually to solve that problem actually doesn't need 5 camera angles and multiple edits. It's just an iPhone recording it. You've told a similar story or similar principles about, I think, was it your son and Scouts? I wonder if you could share that story. Because I think, again, just hearing these different examples in different settings really just highlights the point that I would love to get across in this conversation, that this material is essential for everybody. It doesn't matter who you are, what you do in your life, what you do in your job. These principles that you write so beautifully about will absolutely help you.
The story of my son is that he'd set a big goal. 12 years old, he came to me, said he wants to do scouting and he wants to get his Eagle Scout by the time he turns 14, which is, normally your goal is by the time you turn 18. You have to do it literally by your 18th birthday or they won't. It's just like 100, but no, zero tolerance after that time. But he set the goal. And so we started working on it together. The whole experience was pretty good, positive experience, and good excuse to spend time together. Everything was going pretty much according to plan, including the final big project that you do. He got a whole group of people to help him build a 180-foot fence, paint it, do it in sort of one big day together. It was like fun experience. There was one final thing to do, and that is to write up the report about the final project. And that doesn't sound like such a big thing, but I personally know of someone who did everything but that final report. And eventually, years after they'd completed it, everything else in the program, tried to hand it in a day after their 18th birthday, and they didn't get their Eagle. So they didn't get the Eagle Scout. They didn't complete it because they didn't get that final thing over the line. And we started being like those people. I mean, it's like first it's days where we're just going to get this little, this report done. And then it became, weeks. And we start moving into months. And I got them together. I said, okay, listen, why is this taking us so long? Why is it taking you so long? Why is it taking me, long to help you? What's going on? And we just realized that we were just overcomplicating it all. We had seen ourselves other examples of people who had built the most spectacular final reports, in wooden boxes, carved and beautifully designed. And, I might say it this way, sort of parent projects rather than the Scout projects it seemed at play. But there's like 100 hours of work, some of these things. And they, they're amazing. Yes. But we said, well, what does done look like for us? Well, it just means we have taken this to the Scout office and they have stamped approval. Well, what are the minimum steps to completion? What's the minimum we need to do to get this job done? We need a small 3-page essay. It doesn't have to be 20 pages. It's 3 pages. That is what the requirement is. So do the requirement. Okay, we need to put a few photographs in there and write down. We don't need an essay about all of them. Just a little one-liner from him for every picture. What's the very first obvious step we can take? Instead of worrying about the 100th step, what's the very first one? Get a binder. Drive to the shops and buy a binder. That is the first thing we can do. And as soon as we started asking these different questions, the action just became, it's like a physical change in you. When you know what the next action is and it's doable, your whole body changes. It's like, yeah, I can do that. We can do that. We can go to the shops right now and we can buy that. And we did. Okay, what's the very next step? Well, we can select a few photographs that were taken on the day on the phone. And so it got done after that really fast, within the next week. Handed off and completed, and he was able to get his Eagle, 1 week before his 14th birthday. So it worked. But it didn't work because we tried to go the second mile on everything. We just said, we're just going to do the first mile and we're going to do it. And that my life has been, so many of the mistakes I've made in my life have been not because I didn't try, but because I was trying too hard, because I was trying to go the second mile and I hadn't gone the first. And so that's where I think perfectionism really can hinder our ability to start projects and our ability to finish them, because we're just adding on stuff that no one is actually asking for, that nobody needs us to do.
That's kind of the key there, Greg, isn't it? It's not that you're saying never go the extra mile. What I hear is you're saying go the extra mile when it matters, when you've identified that it really matters to you for what you're trying to do. But when it doesn't matter, don't waste your energy, your cognitive loads, because I think people could misinterpret this potentially and say, well, I'm not going to work hard anymore. I'm only going to do the minimum that I ever need to do, which is, of course, not how we want to bring up our children. It's not how we want to, the message we want to give in society. So how do you help people find that sort of middle lane between those two extremes?
Well, I think that, again, this is about making the essential things easier. That alone gets you closer to the middle lane. It's not just about living an easy life. It's not about just being lazy. It's about saying, what is the right and best way to do the work that you came here to do?
Maybe we've got to broaden out what we recommend to people. Say, it doesn't matter how you move your body, but you just want to move it more and find what actually works for you. But Are there any sort of universal principles when it comes to movement that actually do work for all of us?
In terms of getting us to move? I mean, I go back to the simple, I mean, I think there's two basic impetuses that have, over millennia have been the basis for how and why people move. And one is because it's necessary, and the other is because it's fun. And for most people, fun involves social. Sometimes going for a run by yourself or a walk by yourself is meditative, and it's nice to be by yourself and you can think through a problem. But for most of us, we like to be with other people. And so that's why Park Run is so successful. It's social. Here in Cambridge, we have the November Project. Every Wednesday, people do these wonderful runs and they run up the stadium and they do all kinds of great stuff. Wow. We have, all around the world, there are various kinds of social events. There, dancing is social. Playing a game of, soccer or football is social. I mean, the list goes on, right? And there are many ways to do it socially. And I think, so that's critical. But that's never going to be enough for some folks. And exercise, physical activity used to be necessary in our lives. And that was the impetus that people had to get out and every day and do work. And so we need to find ways without coercing them unethically to make exercise, to make physical activity necessary. And because it's not appropriate to tell adults that they can't have the benefits of society unless they exercise, right? We need to help people help themselves. And I think the way to do that is through what's called a commitment contract. So let me go again back to education. In education, education works on a commitment contract basis for adults, right? So I'm a professor in a university where people pay ghastly sums to go to Harvard, right? I mean, I think the tuition is, and room and board and all that costs like $60,000 to $70,000 a year. That's full. Of course, most students don't end up paying that. I mean, the vast majority get financial aid. So don't worry. Most of my students are not fabulously wealthy, actually. Many of them are first-generation students because we're lucky we have really good financial aid. But anyway, somebody's paying $60,000 to $70,000 every year for them to go to school. And there's some commitment from them to go to school. And what are they doing? They're having people like me torture them, right? I make them take exams. I make them read books. I make them stay up late at night studying. And if they don't do well, I give them a bad grade, which stigmatizes them for the rest of their life. But they do it willingly because they've signed a kind of a commitment contract. Whereas they're paying money for me to make them do stuff which they know is good for them, which they otherwise wouldn't do for themselves. And we do all kinds of other commitment contracts in our world. And I think exercise should be part of that. We should find exercise, there are many, so there's a wonderful program called stick.com. It's a website run through some economists. They used to be at Yale. I'm not sure if they're still at Yale, where you can basically pick either a carrot or a stick, right? And I describe this in the book because because there's a friend of mine in San Francisco who's been trying to lose weight, and she gave stick.com, I think, $2,000. So not a small amount of money. And every week she agreed that she was going to walk a certain number of miles. And if she didn't get those miles in, and her husband was a referee, if she didn't do those miles, as affirmed by her husband, they would automatically send $50 that week to the National Rifle Association. That's the big association that tries to prevent gun control laws in the United States. And she is very, very much hates the NRA and wants to see gun, and she has never missed a week of her walking since she's been doing that. So she signed a commitment contract, put some money behind it. Now that's a kind of an extreme one, but there are other ways we can do it, just through a friend. I mean, a lot of my early morning runs, I don't, at 6 a.m., I do not want to run, I promise you. I mean, no, but I want to be in bed with my wife, right? But I often meet a friend of mine who's a cardiologist, and he's at 6 a.m. and he doesn't want to be there either, but we kind of agreed the day before that we were going to meet each other at 6 a.m. To go for a run. And usually we're just like irritated at each other and we don't even speak for the first, 10 minutes. And then slowly we warm up, and I'm never unhappy that I did that run at the end, but I did it because I coerced myself through a commitment contract.
Yeah. Very, very practical and pragmatic approach. I guess what you're saying is that the way we've typically encouraged physical activity has been, very prescriptive. You have to do this. You know, if you don't do it, you're not really looking after yourself. You sort of have to rely. We're very much putting it down to individual motivation, individual willpower. And what you're saying, I guess, is that this is not working, right? We've not evolved to exercise. We're now living in a society where we simply don't have to anymore. That necessity has gone. So you need to find a way to make it necessary. And the way you found of doing it is you're meeting someone. So if your buddy has gone to the trouble of getting up early in the morning and goes to your agreed spot and you don't show up, there is a bit of, you know, you have social pressure to show up, which is why so many movement programs talk about, you know, doing it with other people, right? Because if you're leaving it up to yourself to motivate yourself, there's going to be times, like I know when I got into parkrun, I remember thinking at the time I wasn't really a runner, right? And let me put it another way. I didn't perceive myself as a runner, whereas now I do, but I still went because I did it with my son. Is reason one. And reason two is there was this big community there, this really friendly community at parkrun. So I just had to make sure that my son and I were at the start line by 5 to 9 on a Saturday morning. And if I got there, I would complete a 5K. But if I had to do that myself, even if I had to do that myself with my son, I bet you some Saturdays we wouldn't do it. And so I think that accountability piece is I think it's really interesting. Now, you mentioned you're not a fan of coercion, yet you write a very surprising, certainly surprising to me, you write about, is it the Swedish, is it Bjorn Borg, the Swedish underwear, sportswear manufacturer? And I was mesmerized reading that story. So I wonder if you could tell that, and because that's actually taking quite a different approach, right?
Yeah, I had so much fun doing that. So I was thinking about this, you know, because the last section of the book, the last quarter of the book, is really about how to apply the sort of natural history of exercise to the modern world. And I was interested in this idea of coercion, and I wanted to see if I could find an example of people who are forced to exercise, adults. I mean, we force kids to exercise in school, but nobody blinks an eye at that, because we force kids to do all kinds of stuff and think it's totally acceptable. Because children can't make up their, you know, children aren't responsible for their own decisions, but adults are. And I was searching throughout the world. I was thinking about like monks in Asia who are forced to do things and whatever. And I wanted to, you know, I'm very into participant observation. I like to try what I study. And so, you know, that's why I've tried barefoot running, and I tried it. That's why I've chased animals on, you know, done races against horses, and you know, I'm into that. I like.
And we're going to come to all that. Believe you me.
I like to put myself in the shoes of the people I'm studying, and so I found on the web a few articles about the Bjorn Borg company. It's a company in Sweden that makes mostly underwear, but other kinds of sports clothing. It's actually no longer owned by Bjorn Borg, but it's and you know how those companies have those like little contact me thing. So late at night, I remember telling my wife I'd found this company and I'd read some articles, and she said, well, contact them. So I got on the contact page and I said, you know, dear Bjorn Borg company, I'm a professor at, you know, whatever, I'm interested in this topic and I'm kind of curious to learn more. And I remember going to bed and saying to her, yeah, I'm sure I'll never hear from them. And then the next morning in my inbox was an email saying, come and join Sports Hour. Come anytime you want. We'll be happy to show you. So I was on sabbatical and I had some time. So I got on an airplane and I went to you know, they were very kind and they told me when to show up. So I showed up, and they basically said I could talk to anybody in the company. And, you know, I had to go to Sports Hour because at Bjorn Borg company, everybody has to exercise. It's a requirement. And there's a sports hour every Friday at, I think it's 10 a.m. And there's no excuses unless you're injured, right? Whatever, or something like that. If you're a board member, if you're a visitor, it doesn't matter who you are. If you sweep the floors, if you're the CEO, doesn't matter. You go to Sports Hour. And so I went to Sports Hour, which is a really hard kind of CrossFit workout. It was great. It was exhilarating. And you can do it as hard as you want or as light as you want. And then they have all kinds of other events where they, you know, instead of a Christmas party where everybody gets drunk, they run through the streets of Stockholm and have hot chocolate afterwards. You know, I mean, it's a delightful environment, but of course, you know, not everybody liked it, and some people left the company, but some people who are in the company love it. And I just talked to folks about it and to see how it worked. And to my surprise, it was actually pretty popular. The people actually kind of realized that it was a beneficial thing. But I should also say, these are people who've drunk the Kool-Aid, as we say in the United States, right? That, everybody who really hated it has obviously left the company. You wouldn't be in that company if you didn't think this was acceptable. But the fact of the matter is, that's, as far as I can tell, the only company in the world that does that. And we're not going to find, that's just not going to work in most places. And we have to find other ways to make exercise necessary.
Yeah, what's interesting about that company for me, and you're absolutely right, there's that inbuilt bias, isn't there? Because people, I guess some people, if they know that about the company and that's not their kind of thing, they may not even apply for a job in the first place. If they start working there and they think this is a good idea, but then they feel it's too much pressure, there's some sort of camaraderie that they don't like or they don't thrive on, they might leave. But it's an interesting model, and I appreciate this cannot be rolled out across society. There's a kind of ethical point there, I think, as well. But, I wonder what you think about the ethics of that, where a company says, hey, look, and again, I'm not speaking for that company because I don't know the ideology behind it, but let's say a company felt that, well, we know physical activity is important because it will help the employees, it will help them with their health and well-being, it's going to help them concentrate, focus, be more productive, it's a great way of bonding. I guess what would happen if companies some companies were like, well, look, this is part of the culture here, and if you want to work here, this is sort of what we would be supporting. It's quite a tricky one ethically, isn't it? Because it could be done in a way where it's very supportive, and it's like, well, if you just want to walk for that hour around the gym, that's fine. There's going to be no pressure on you from your manager or from the boss. I know you'd have to demonstrate that there was no discrimination by doing that, but it's working there. I mean, could that be you're saying that we need to take personalized approaches. Well, so could that work for some companies?
Well, I mean, let's flip the question and ask, did that used to work for some companies? So in the United States, as in every in Europe, universities are kind of like companies, and every university until recently required students to exercise. In the United States, physical activity, physical education was 100%. Every single university in the country, Harvard included, required physical education. Wow. And going back to the ancient Greek philosophers, and in the traditions in India and China, everywhere in the world where you had educational systems, which of course were for elite people, right? Because peasants didn't go to school, but wealthy aristocrats did. With no exception, exercise became part of people's education because people understood that there was a relationship between exercise and the body and the mind, right? Mental health and physical health, and that exercise is good for students. And that was dropped in the United States and starting basically in the 70s. So Harvard, for example, got rid of its physical education requirement in the 1970s. And now, we see the results, but these are adults, these are 18-plus-year-old people, and it was required. And so, I think this is, and of course, until recently, everybody had to be physically active to get to work. They had to, walk to get to work. They didn't have elevators to get them to their floor. I mean, we could go on with all the things that have changed in the world. So we've kind of shifted our workplace and shifted our schools without shifting the kind of how we approach our bodies. And so maybe Bjorn Borg company is going back to something very ancient in a new way. But the fact that we're so uncomfortable with it, I think, is interesting. We're just so worried about coercion and people's rights, and for good reason. But we're also, I think sometimes we also, I'm going to probably get myself in trouble now, but look, I think it's, as you can already tell, I'm very opposed to body shaming and fitness shaming, right? It's unacceptable. But sometimes I think because we're so worried about body shaming and fitness shaming, we go to the extreme and basically turn off the whole system.
Yeah.
And I wonder if if we can't have our cake and eat it too, so to speak, right? Can we find a way to help people be physically active without engaging in body shaming, without engaging in fitness shaming? And I think we can. And again, I'm going to go back to my commitment contract model, because if, let's just say you're unfit, you're overweight, you're struggling, you hate to exercise, but you want to exercise. And if I told you you had to go to a CrossFit, workout every week and, do 150 burpees with this, highly muscled, nutcase in front of you who's your boss, you'd hate it, right? But if you could just walk 20 minutes a day, climb the stairs, right? Pick your own goal and work towards that, that would fit your fitness level, you could do it on your own, you could do it with friends, etc. Not in a way that is, we can find ways for people to be more physically active that can accommodate every disability, can accommodate every level of fitness, can accommodate, but we as a society, we've been very uncreative about it. We're not really willing to put in the time and the money and the effort to make it happen.
Yeah. And I think a lot of people get put off by gyms, for example. They've sort of been sold this idea that gyms, if I want to get fit, whatever their interpretation of fit is, I want to do my physical activity, then it has to be at the gym. It has to have a particular name. It has to have particular clothes that I wear, because if I don't, it doesn't count. And for me, as a doctor, I find myself trying to break down that barrier with patients all the time. I've often said, now I didn't know about these sort of tribes and these cultures for years who've danced, but I've often said to patients, look, do you like dancing? They go, yeah, I like dancing. I said, okay, well, let's start there. Why not, just before dinner every night for 10 minutes, have a dance in the kitchen, put on the tunes and dance. Go, yeah, but do I need something more? I said, well, let's start there. And I've seen families bond over it. I've seen people's mood get better just from the act of dancing every day. And, a lot of people are conditioned to think, oh no, it needs to have, I need to go to this particular class and then I need to buy the latest outfit. And
again, that's the commodification, commercialization of exercise, right? It's now a product and you have to spend money on it. And, you have to, and there are people there to advertise to us that, you can't run unless you wear these fancy shoes, and you have to have your fancy watch and all this sort of stuff. And frankly, I enjoy fancy shoes and my fancy watch when I go running, but we don't need it actually. Okay. And it works for some people, but it obviously is not working for everybody. And so, yeah, again, I think we need to kind of step back from our Western medicalized, commercialized attitude towards exercise and take a broader view, a broader perspective. And if we just simply do that, which is what my book tries to do, we'll come up with all kinds of other wonderful solutions. Dancing is just one of them. Going for walks with your like, why, for example, do we have so many boring meetings where we sit around in chairs, or now we sit glued to our bloody Zoom screens, right? Why can't we get up and walk, right? And have meetings on the hoof, right? There's so many examples of ways in which we could just encourage physical activity in a way that'll make it both necessary and fun.
Yeah. Now, Daniel, a lot of the research you did for this book has taken you to wonderful places around the world to do what sound like, from where I'm sitting, incredible things. In Tanzania, you've stayed with hunter-gatherer tribes. You've, I think, hunted kudu. You've ran with horses. And I'd love to sort of explore some of those, because these are things that many of us have never done. And I think there's something to be learned from that. So I was going to ask you, what has been some of the most surprising things that you've learned when you've gone and lived alongside indigenous tribes and communities? You've mentioned dancing. Did that surprise you? And was there anything else that you discovered that you didn't previously know?
Well, I mean, I'm a really lucky person. I'm such a, fortunate to have a great job that, I get paid to go have fun and travel around the world and study things that interest me. I'm a ridiculously lucky person. And I would say that, what surprised me the most is really, quite literally, it's the story I tell in the beginning of the book, which is, which is that people in these societies don't think what they're doing is exercise. And for me, that was the spark that started this book, because it was 2012 and I was finishing my previous book, which is called The Story of the Human Body. And in that book, the kind of message of that book is we didn't evolve to be healthy. And that book is about mismatched diseases, how the modern world that we're living is, we're very poorly adapted to it in some respects. That get us sick in various ways. But so I was finishing up that book and I went to Highland, Mexico. So I went to the Ironman competition in Kona. This is a true story. I'm not exaggerating anything here. I was part of the medical conference that precedes this incredible race, which is just amazing. You know, people do a 2.4 mile open water swim, then they do a 112 mile bicycle ride across the desert, and then they do a full marathon in like 90-degree heat. It's insane, right? And the people who win do it in like a little over 8 hours. I mean, they're like cyborgs. They're not real human beings. Like, you know, it's just it's astonishing. And then I got back, you know, working on the book, and then went to Highland, Mexico, where I hired a guy to help me go into really, really remote areas to study the Tarahumara, who are sort of famous for their running. And you know, I'd read about how they barefoot run and do these long distances. And what I discovered was that, first of all, I didn't see anybody running barefoot whatsoever anywhere. And I was traveling all over the place. And when I asked people about their running, they were like, well, people did run in these traditional races. But other than that, they didn't run. And I had this like list of questions. Being a good anthropologist, I had a questionnaire, which I had, you know, designed carefully. And one of the questions was, you know, how do you train for your running? And my translator couldn't, you know, was struggling to figure out how to ask this question because there was no word for train in the Native American language, Rawamari. And so she was trying to, you know, you practice, you know, she was trying to explain to these, and there was this one 70-something-year-old guy she asked, and I remember him because he was, I don't know, maybe the 10th or 12th person I was measuring and studying. And he was kind of a very serious fellow. He was a runner too, by the way. And the vast majority of people don't run very much. He was a runner, and he, through the translator, asked me, well, why would anybody run if they didn't have to? And at first I was thinking, this question I wrote is really bad. I mean, I wrote the wrong questionnaire, and then I realized, actually, this is telling me something that you know, people there run when they need to, but exercise is just not part of their lexicon. You know, training is not part of their lexicon, and that kind of just permeated my brain as I started. You know, I took every opportunity I could to do something where I was in the Western Ghats. We were looking for barefoot runners, and we were, you know, looking for people who were running there. We were, you know, been into Greenland and to various places in Africa, etc. You know, every place I've gone, I've noticed that people who are very physically active don't think of what they do in any way whatsoever as exercise. And to me, I think that's the most surprising. That was initially most surprising.
Yeah. I mean, it's very powerful, even though I've read that. To hear you explain it is very, very powerful because it gets to the heart of what the problem in society is about getting us to move more, right? It's like these communities don't have words for exercise or training. It just doesn't exist because I guess it's necessity driven.
Or you know what's really beautiful? The Tarahumara, when they run their long distance races, it's a form of prayer for them. I mean, to me, that's really beautiful. It's spiritual, right? They run because they believe it makes them closer to God. Yeah. What if we adopted that attitude, right? I mean, it's such a beautiful thought, right? And it does, right? And for them, actually, the concept of chase. Actually, I have one of the balls over here. Actually, this is one of the balls they use in their foot race. When they chase this ball, the ball gets dirty, etc., and it gets lost. And for them, that kind of the randomness is like a metaphor for life and for the vagaries of life, and it's really beautiful what they do, and that's true of a lot of the sacred dances that people do, and the list goes on.
Would they kick that ball around and follow it? Is that what would happen?
Yeah, they kind of flick it with their foot, and it as far as they can, and then they chase it and they find it again, and they flick it and they chase it and they find it and they flick it, and they'll do this. There are two teams doing this, and they'll do it until one team laps the other in a course.
Yeah.
And sometimes the race can be 10 miles and sometimes the race can be 50 miles. And it, you know, depends on how they set up the race and what they agree on beforehand. And they're betting wildly. So, you know, it's a big social event and it's fun. But it's also a form of prayer.
Yeah. This is something I explored in a conversation with Sanjay Rawal, I don't know how many episodes ago, he was the director on a film called 3100. If you've not seen it,
I've seen snippets of it, but I have not had a chance to sit down and watch the whole thing. But it's amazing.
Having read your book, I think I can almost guarantee you would love this documentary, because it's really, in many ways, showing tribes around the world how running is, you know, it is about transcendence. It's a spiritual practice. It's not for calories burnt, how many miles have I gone, you know, what did my heart rate do, all this kind of stuff that, again, nothing necessarily wrong with it. It's to get them closer to, you know, I guess being at one with the world, sort of finding themselves. And it's really, really interesting that, because the way we do it here in the West, by and large, and of course everyone is different, does seem to be quite far removed from that. It's interesting because you have been termed the Barefoot Professor in the past. And you mentioned when you went to Mexico, you didn't see that many people barefoot. I think you've been to other cultures like in Kenya and India where you have seen a lot of people barefoot. So what's the deal there?
Well, there's a story behind it if you have time.
I've got plenty of time, and this is probably one of the things I'm most interested in. So, and I've got the sort of Professor of Barefoot Running in front of me. So you go as deep as you want here.
So here's the story. So in 2004, Dennis Bramble and I published the Born to Run paper. That was the title in Nature, Born to Run. And it was fun. I got invited to give all kinds of lectures, and I gave a lecture the night before the Boston Marathon. I think it was 2005. And it was a dark and stormy night, literally. I mean, there was an incredible rainstorm that came in just before the marathon. Everyone was worried about, you know, the rain and all that. And it was a packed audience. And there was a guy sitting in the front row who I'll never forget him, because I remember he looked kind of like a bum from Harvard Square. And he had socks on that were wrapped in duct tape. And he was very intent on the lecture. And afterwards, he came up to me and asked, you know, if people evolved to run, you know, did they run barefoot? And is there any problem with that? And I said, well, of course they ran barefoot, because shoes were invented fairly recently. And you know, I don't know really very much about barefoot running, but you know, I realized so at the time we were studying head stabilization. Now, when you run, when your body hits the ground, your head jiggles, right? And we were interested in how the body stabilizes the head, you know, how you prevent that jiggling from occurring so it doesn't blur your vision. And most of the runners we were looking at were heel strikers, right? They would land on their heel and their head would jiggle. And I remember there was a few runners occasionally would come into the lab and they would be forefoot strikers. They'd land on the ball of their foot and their head wouldn't jiggle as much. And I remember thinking, they're like, you're ruining my experiment. And, you know, because, you know, we're not getting the head jiggling we wanted to measure. And so this guy comes in, and his name is Barefoot Jeffrey. He owns a bicycle shop here in the area. And he came in and we set up, you know, the equipment, and he just ran light as a feather. No head jiggling whatsoever. And you know, he landed on the ball of his foot. And I asked him why he landed on the ball of his foot. And he said, well, it doesn't hurt. If you land on your heel, it hurts. And so we started doing some experiments and realized that that's how people ran when they barefoot. You can't slam into the ground like you can in a shoe because you have all that cushioning in the shoe. You have to run lightly and gently. And so we got to studying barefoot running. And of course, I've been working in Africa for many decades. And I've seen people in Africa, you know, running barefoot, but I'd never really measured them. So we went out and started measuring them and, you know, published another paper in Nature about the biomechanics of barefoot running. But I always like to try what I study. And we realized that to me, it's not about whether you're barefoot or not. To me, it's about how you run. To me, running is a skill, just like swimming or climbing a tree or many of the other things that we do. And there are better and worse ways to run. And what barefoot running does is that it helps us learn the skill of running. That I think there are advantages to not crashing into the ground and relying on some technology in your shoe to make that comfortable. And so to me, it's not about, you know, to me, I think, you know, you can run beautifully in shoes and you can run terribly in shoes, and you can run beautifully barefoot and you can run terribly barefoot. But what really matters is how you run, and that barefoot running gives us information. And sure, shoes are comfortable, and I mostly wear shoes when I run. I also wear minimal shoes, and I agree with everything you just said. You can't just throw away your shoes or transition your shoes and immediately change your gait. You have to transition gradually and slowly, and you have to learn the skill of running. But if you do, the evidence suggests that there's a lot of benefits, and you don't destroy your knees, and you can do all kinds of good things with your body. And you know, there's a lot of evidence, and there's mounting evidence, I think, that supports that. But of course, it's still controversial because there's a lot of money in the shoe industry, and there are people who like what they do, and they get upset if you tell them that, you know, they should be doing something different. And, you know, for many of them, they shouldn't. You know, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. But many people are injured, and they might benefit from changing the way they run.
Yeah, I mean, that certainly echoes what I've seen in my clinical experience. And even a really good friend of mine, actually, who has very much been enamored with my journey to minimalist shoes, he sort of transitioned to pretty much everything apart from running until maybe 6 months ago. He'd wear minimalist shoes for work, for walking, for going out with his family at the weekends. And he really liked the connection it gave him. And he sort of felt he was moving differently. But he said, I've got no real reason to change the way I run because I can do it. You know, I don't get injured. But something changed about 6 months ago. I think just on that journey, he was quite interested to go, well, what is it like if I actually try running? So he went super slow. You know, he could only do 3 or 4K, I think, initially. But now he's a badge wearing sort of barefoot runner. And I think all these things become quite reductionist, don't they? It's like barefoot running, good or bad. You know, minimal shoes, good or bad. It's like, well, it kind of depends on the context a little bit, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, almost all the world's best runners have what I call a barefoot style. And yet it's funny that there's some people get really mad. Like, you know, like you tell me I have to be a 4-foot striker. It's like, no, you don't have to be a 4-foot striker. But, you know, some of the world's best runners are 4-foot strikers. You might, you know, there's nothing wrong with it. So people are very, people are tribal, right? Just like in the United States, you know, you've got the Republicans versus Democrats, and you now have 4-foot strikers versus rear-foot strikers. It's crazy. I mean, I think actually, it's interesting. People often ask me what kind of shoes I wear. Well, I wear many different kinds of shoes. You know, today I wore one pair, but tomorrow I'll probably wear something other. Maybe Thursday I'll go barefoot. I mean, you know, why do we have to categorize ourselves and just do one thing? It's a fascinating insight. The other thing that's interesting to me about barefoot running is how out of touch we are with our bodies. A lot of people, the idea just makes them cringe. Like, are you serious? I mean, well, you're going to cut your feet. What about all the hypodermic needles and glass out there? And, you know, I've heard it all, right? And all these people haven't tried. They have no idea. And, you know, I think everybody should just try. Just, you know, go for a few hundred meters, take your shoes off and run for just a few hundred meters down a street. Don't, you know, make sure it's a smooth street, and, you know, don't do it at night so you can see the glass and the hypodermic needles, depending on where you live, right? But you'll discover that it's actually kind of fun. But don't do too much too fast, because you will injure yourself if you do too much too fast. But people are just out of touch with how their bodies work.
I guess even just if people are lucky enough to have a garden or a backyard, you know, even just start by walking in your backyard or garden, just get used to that feeling again. You know, it's always fascinated me. So you know, my parents are immigrants from India to the UK. My dad came over in the early 1960s. And, you know, in Asian culture, certainly in Indian culture, you don't wear shoes inside the house, right? It's just not done. So I grew up, we never wore shoes inside the house. We'd always leave it outside or in the porch. Then you go in either in your socks or barefoot. And it's only, you know, when you get older and you start interacting with your friends and go around to their houses, I remember thinking, oh, well, these guys wear shoes in their house. Oh, wow. You know, because my norm was that you don't wear shoes in your house. And it's just interesting how culturally things are different. I'm not saying that necessarily plays out as we get older, but it is interesting that I've certainly noticed in some of my friends growing up, one of my best mates in particular, I remember he, you know, even at university going around, he'd always, like, getting ready in the morning, having a shower, shaving, would be putting his shoes on, even if he was inside the house. And I guess culturally, these things are different. I remember going to India every other summer when I was a kid. We used to go to a city called Kolkata, or what used to be called Calcutta, for 6 weeks. And I remember playing with my cousins, and my cousin, who was about 4 years younger than me, he'd always want me to come and play football. And we'd go down to the apartment, just underneath all the apartments, there was a bit of land, and they were all playing barefoot, like properly tackling, going in hard. And I started playing it. I found it really difficult at first, but by the end of the summer, you're used to it. So
Sure.
it's different everywhere, right? In terms of how much they actually wear shoes.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I've also had those experiences. I obviously haven't gone to India as much as you have, but I've had those experiences. And actually, one of my favorite moments was playing. I didn't make it into the book, but I remember playing cricket with a bunch of kids in a tiny little village in the Ghat Mountains. And what was terrifying was not being barefoot. It was those bowlers. Boy, they were terrifying. But the way in which but you used a very important term there, which is these cultural ideals, and they translate into so many other ways in which we use our bodies. So another example is sitting or sleeping, right? The idea that it's, that this, one of the Western ideas we have is that you should sleep in a quiet, dark room with a soft, comfortable mattress with nobody around you and no sound and no light and no nothing, this kind of, stimulus-free environment. That's a cultural norm too, right? And until recently, even in the West, nobody did that, right? And yet people feel that they can't sleep properly unless they're in that kind of environment, which is again, it's what you get used to. It's a cultural norm. And then if you're not in that kind of environment, then you get stressed and your cortisol levels go up because you're anxious about sleep. And of course that prevents you from sleeping in the first place. How we sit, like we're told, we have to sit in a chair with a particular posture. That's also a cultural norm that's completely made up in the 19th century by German orthopedic surgeons who for some reason opined that when you sit, you should have the same curvature in your spine as when you stand. There's no evidence to support that whatsoever. It's completely made up. And in fact, there's plenty of evidence that doesn't support that. I could go on. We have all kinds of cultural norms that there's nothing wrong with them because you can't not have a culture. I mean, we all grew up in a particular culture, but sometimes we need to step back from what we're told and question it or ask, does that work for me? Particularly in our modern world in which often it doesn't.
When you focus on what you don't have, you lose what you do have. That was, I mean,
I'm going to say it again because it's such an important line here. If you focus on what you lack, you lose what you have.
Thank you for repeating it. That's the first time you said it, and I have heard you say this before, but first time you said it in this conversation, again, I felt it deep inside me. I felt that tingle around my heart because there is such deep truth in that. And actually that phrase helped me this morning. There was, as I shared before we started recording, I sort of exerted myself a lot yesterday and didn't sleep well last night and have been pretty exhausted for most of today.
Yes.
And, when we haven't slept well, we're a bit more emotionally reactive, less resilient, and something bothering me in work that I hadn't done yet or hadn't managed to do. And I was focusing on that. And then I thought, and it's great because I was researching this conversation.
Yes.
That phrase shaped everything. I thought, well, Rangan, you know what? You kind of do a lot. You're getting a lot done. You've not missed a Wednesday with this podcast since the first week of last September, through Christmas and New Year. It's kind of like you're doing a lot already. You don't need to worry about not doing the extra 1 or 2%. So first of all, thank you, because that phrase was very helpful this morning. It instantaneously changed my perspective, because a lot of what you're talking about is perspective, right? You're talking about the same situation, but just a different experience of that same situation. So I think that quote might be going up on the wall as well.
I love this. And at the point of being irritating, I want to just state the whole quote again, because it's not one line, it's 2 lines. It's, if you focus on what you lack, you lose what you have. If you focus on what you have, you gain what you lack.
Sorry to interrupt. If you're enjoying this conversation, there's loads more like it on my channel. Please do press subscribe and hit that bell. Now, back to the conversation.
So it's the combination that to me is for me personally, was such a game changer. And I love that it was useful to you today. It's useful to me many times. And of course, what you're saying is right. If you focus on what you have, suddenly it all floods to you. Oh my goodness, I've got all the books, I've got all the podcasts I've been doing, I've got all this preparation in life, I've got the whole, I'm a doctor, I've got all of my life's experience is at my disposal in this moment.
Yeah.
And suddenly it puts you hopefully at a better state of like, I can handle this.
Yeah.
I don't have to worry about every possible degree of preparation for this. In fact, I was just talking to a friend who says that one of his effortless hacks is on his team. He'll just say, look, let's just be light in prep. Like, let's just do our prep lightly so that we can sort of show up either with sometimes no preparation. Yeah. Now, again, that is a dangerous message if someone is not someone who's a high-achieving, challenging person who's trying to achieve a lot. That's who this book is for. It's for highly engaged, capable people who are on the edge of exhaustion. But if someone is in that category, as you just described you feeling just today at least, the message needs to be different. The message is like, hey, it's completely fine. You can have this conversation because you've been preparing it for years. You've got all that you need. All you have to do is show up.
You know what? Today was preparation light because of my my state, right? Because of my state, which was a bit foggy in my head, tired. And I'm a morning person, right? So because you are West Coast, we're recording this conversation, at 4 p.m. UK time. I typically will go to bed at 8:30, 9 o'clock. I'm sort of winding down. I get up at 4:30 and write do my stuff before the kids get up, right? So today I thought, and it's something I've discussed with my sort of close team around the podcast before, say, well, you know what? I do. It's sometimes almost an old relic of how I used to cram for exams, that I will artificially create stress on myself before I'm on the mic. But I realized a few months ago, I thought, well, Rangan, hold on a minute. You've never been short of things to say, as my wife will definitely testify to. I've been having conversations my entire life. As a doctor for 20 years, I have conversations every day. That is what I do. I listen. My goal when I'm with a patient is to listen, really make sure that person feels heard, good body language, be connected, and then respond appropriately to actually what has been said to me. Mm-hmm. And I've realized over the last few months that that's kind of the approach I take on the podcast. I kind of feel they're sort of like my GP consultations, just expanded out on a microphone with people who are not coming to me for health. Do you know what I mean? So yes. It was helpful in the sense of, actually, I don't need to make this hard. I've read his work before. I'm familiar with it. And again, focusing on not what we lack, what we have. I'm like, Rangan, this is a guy who has sold a gazillion books. He hit the zeitgeist 6 or 7 years ago. I have the luxury of 2 hours with him to pick his brain and discuss things that I'm passionate about. What are you complaining about? What is wrong with your life? That sounds like a pretty good day to me. Same situation, but gone into it with a different intention.
Yeah, I love what you're saying because that the extra, okay, I've got to push, I've got to cram for the exam mentality. Like, you don't want to be cramming all the time. I mean, I'm not even sure it's great to be cramming ever, but certainly as a lifestyle, it is counterproductive. For people who are high achievers, who are on the edge of exhaustion, if they try to cram it in their life, if they're trying to push it and to force it, then they won't just get to diminishing returns. where every extra unit of effort produces less result than the last unit of effort, it actually gets to negative returns, where every unit of effort is actually making everything worse. If you stop, you will definitely be getting a better return on investment than trying an extra unit. And I just think that this is kind of part of the great discovery.
Yeah.
Don't push yourself past a point that is helpful. Overexertion makes it harder to achieve the results that you want. I remember a time, listen to this. I remember when I had a client come to me and say, I want you to do 3 leadership presentations to our tech company. It's a global brand, but one that was in a high growth state. They say, well, we want you to come. We saw a presentation that you'd created, and we just want you to come and do this 3 times for us. And then really what we want is a 2-year engagement with you where you help us to scale and so on. It was just a fantastic opportunity. And so everything is set. Like all I have to do, I've already sent them the materials. I've already sent them the work. I've already done this presentation for a different client all over the world. Like it is set. It is done. It is agreed. It is good money. It is everything is right. And then the day before I go, it's like cramming mode. I'm like, yeah, but what if I could do something special for them? What if I could just push it, And I go, well, I've been doing this new thinking. Maybe I could just do it on the new thinking. And I get going into this mode. And it's like, this is all like after hours. So this is when I should be done for the day. But I'm like, okay, well, let me just fiddle with these slides. Maybe I'll do the slides. And then, well, let's do a different handout. And I spent hours and hours on that. I didn't do an all-nighter, but it was that sort of a feeling. It was just went hours and hours later and later. The next morning I wake up, I am foggy. I'm like literally driving to this appointment. I'm emailing them right before I'm driving saying, oh, new slides, here they are. Can you print these documents out at the facility? All of that's unprofessional. So now it's already worse. And I go to the presentation. I start giving the presentation, and I keep having to turn around to look at the slides because I'm not familiar with them and I'm foggy. And then somebody challenges me on one of them. They're like, well, I don't understand that. I don't really buy that. And I'm so unprepared. Yeah. There's this new content and I'm stressed because I'm tired and I don't handle that well either. The whole thing is like seriously a disaster. One of the worst experiences I've had teaching ever. And they canceled the other 2 presentations. And of course, there's no 2-year experience. I mean, like that is of course, that doesn't happen every day to us, but that is an example to me of how like overexertion and doing that, the pushing beyond the healthy, helpful, sweet spot can cost us a lot. You're doing the right things and even for the right reasons, but the overexertion makes it harder to achieve the result that was already there for the taking.
Were you a crammer as a kid at school?
Yeah, I think I probably was a bit of a crammer, but let me tell you about my experience in education. My parents didn't go to university, and so they emphasized education, but they didn't teach me the skills of it. Like this is how to write an essay, or this is how to go to the teacher and talk about what's going on and what if you're missing something. So I just hit education with like motivation and work. My best friend growing up, Sam Bridgestock, he questions this story, but I remember it very distinctly, is that he would always do better than me in education, but I always felt like I was trying harder than him. And it wasn't until years later, so he got, sort of 2 A's and a B in his A levels at the time. And I'm like, okay, how? What are you doing differently to me? And he said it took him years to actually figure it out, the simplest answer. He just said, you just do exactly what the teacher asks you to do and nothing more, nothing less. You just do what they ask you to do. And that was like news to me. From that point on, I would just read exactly what they wanted and not go above and beyond it. I would just do what they asked. And that was actually sufficient. From then on, I got A's. I literally hardly ever not had an A ever since then. Right? That was true in undergraduate. I went to graduate school, went to Stanford, right? And same thing there. You just do what you're asked to do, not more. If you don't know how to do what they are asking, go and ask how to do what they are asking. It's like that was the breakthrough. It's like education in a sense is a bit of a game. And I was the kind of guy that would go and get other books that weren't even on the curriculum. Oh, I just want to learn so much about this. That's a good principle. If you want to become deeply educated in subjects, fine. But in terms of just actually getting the results in an educational system that's dependent on the social approval of that teacher, you just got to learn to do what they ask and nothing else.
Yeah, it's so fascinating because if you just did what was asked of you with your 2 books, right? Okay. I don't know. How does that apply to you writing these unique books that have struck a chord with millions of people around the world?
I mean, let's just talk about how to apply effortless to the writing of effortless. Some ways I succeeded, some ways I didn't in applying it. But like ways, first of all, let's talk about how I made it harder than it needed to be first, my fails. I worried to the point of fear. And I don't see literally any upside to fear with it. I can see taking responsibility. I can see wanting not to fall into some bad habits but typical paths that happen. In the publishing world, it's quite typical that after a book that's been successful, the next book just dies on the vine. So I wanted to avoid that. My mantra, I thought actually a fairly helpful mantra was like, don't write a rubbish book. Like just don't just, take responsibility for it. That seemed to be healthy. But when it gets into fear, that's not making anything better. When you're fearful about what you're doing, you can make it worse in your attempt to make it better. Here's another sort of success and fail with the book. I found that if I wrote 2 hours in a day, first thing in the morning, similar to what you described, I could write 2 average pages, which, by the way, is, for most writers, for those listening or watching this, is actually pretty fast. Yeah. If I wrote 3 or 4 hours, I couldn't write 3 or 4 pages of the same quality. I could write, maybe I would get to sort of 2.5 or 3. If I go 5 or 6 hours or more, I'm making the whole manuscript worse than if I hadn't started writing it at all that day. Like there is a point at which I am going back to stuff I've written that is perfectly fine or even is like well edited. And I'm just, but what if I did it this way? And I'm just, poor judgment is just pouring all over the manuscript. At this point, you've got to stop. And so I learned that I needed to have a pace that had not just a lower bound. Okay, every day write on the book, at least 5 days a week, write on, open the Google Doc and write something. The upper bound was like, don't write more than 2 pages. Like you have an upper bound where you say, look, don't push yourself beyond what is actually optimal for that day. And so that pace helped me to keep enjoying it and to keep making progress going forward. So that's something that worked. Something else that worked that made the experience a bit more effortless was just having a great team. Have the same editor I had before. Yeah. Brought in Jonathan Cullen, who was a great researcher and helped with the book, bringing in things. And there were moments that the experience felt magic because I actually describe it as sort of almost a Harry Potter type experience because we go into this Google Doc and you can see other people writing, my editor going through something I've written. I'd see Jonathan bringing in a story I'd asked him to gather and put together, and he'd bring something in. And I could watch it all happening while I'm working. And I thought that was just so enjoyable that when we were done, we literally, all of us have said to each other that we miss doing that, going into the doc every day and just working together and seeing this progress. Yeah. And so having the right people, having people that have, the 3 I's, which is Warren Buffett uses 3 criteria to select who he works with: high integrity, high intelligence, high initiative, integrity, intelligence, and initiative. And if you don't have integrity, then the other two hurt you. So those are what I'm looking for. And the little team that I had working on this together are so high in those three areas. It just was a pleasure to work together. So those are things that I have, those are examples there mixed together of ways I made it harder than it needed to be, but also ways that were more effortless. And so I think it's about some self-awareness where you keep on going. A final thought on this with in terms of the book itself is you have to have the courage to be rubbish to even begin. We started using the term zero draft, not even first draft, zero draft. Like, this is rubbish, but I'm starting. This is a rubbish version of this story. This is a rubbish version of this account. It's okay. It's draft zero. And sometimes I might write that and not even put it into the Google Doc just to get something out. And then you work on it. And so in a consistent pace, you make it less rubbish and less rubbish and less rubbish. And eventually it becomes good and then a little better. And hopefully it gets to the point where it's great and it's polished. So it's just, but none of that happens in one crammed experience. You aren't going to make something great in one fell swoop. And when we try to do that, what happens is that you get so burned out. You spend a whole weekend, nothing but this. It's like you can't even think about it after that for a while. Yeah. And so it's about this, to me, it's about an effortless pace. Yes, you still want it to be excellent. Your standards haven't changed. High standard people don't just suddenly lose their standards. Yeah. You are not going to suddenly lose your standards. The question is can we construct a life that allows us to get that high standard work done in a way that continues to be sustainable, enjoyable, so that we can do it for the next 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years, rather than just kind of all at one moment and then we get burned out and then the next book is rubbish because we were so burned out and we felt rushed and so on. So I think the effortless pace is a big part of being able to still try to achieve excellence, but in a way that isn't so costly.
And I think that's the key point for me. We can all do a lot in certain ways if we want to now and again. We can burn the candle if we need to, but what's the cost of doing that? Sort of the cost of success. Many people who people look up to who are successful aren't necessarily happy. Maybe they're never seeing their kids or their partner. And something I'm deep in writing at the moment is the difference between success and happiness. And that when we conflate the two, that's where sometimes the problem starts to arise.
There's an amazing essay written by Tennessee Williams, who is the playwright behind The Glass Menagerie and others. And the essay was published in the New York Times, and it's called The Catastrophe of Success. And it's a really beautifully written piece just about what his experience was on the other side of having put The Glass Menagerie out. It's a big hit. Everyone he's meeting, this was so impactful to me. Wow, you've done something so beautiful. And it sent him on a path that took him away from the work itself, from the simple pacing of writing. Every day write the next thing, don't overdo it, but don't just stop doing it. And he talks about what followed in his life and how unhappy that existence was. So that's on this. Like, success can be a catalyst for failure if we're not careful. It will undermine the very things that led to success in the first place. It will eat up and consume all sorts of more important relationships without even thinking about it. So success, can be, as Bill Gates put it, a very poor teacher. So success makes a good servant, but not a great master. So that's sort of on we've got to be careful to make sure that we do things that will help us to get to the next level of success. And that doesn't mean just more of the stuff that got us to this level. The second point here is now on what to do once you are successful, right? Once things, and actually, everybody watching this and listening this is successful if you take anything like a proper perspective about it. The fact that they are alive today in the world, the chances are they are in far better position than the vast majority of the people that have ever lived. So they're going to be more more educated. They're going to have a better chance of a healthy life, and so on, right? Like, of course, there's loads of problems, but we're successful if they're listening to this, if they've got the time to listen to this, if they have the technology to listen to this, they're successful. So they have to figure out what to do now that they are. And I think the thing that was most personally challenging and eureka for me as I was researching effortless was the final section of the book, this idea of effortless results. Effortless results is about creating systems that produce results for you rather than producing results through your own direct individual effort. A linear result is one that you achieve yourself. You do a thing, you get paid for doing that thing. Residual results are you build a thing that produces a result again and again for you. And the difference isn't small. It's absolutely massive. Think about a friend of mine, Jessica Jackley, who had gone to a presentation by Muhammad Yunus at the Crimean Bank, and she was starting to think more like systems. And then she was on a trip in Africa. She meets this woman. She's an entrepreneur. She is selling produce. She's selling vegetables on the side of the road, and every day she has to be there to survive. This is how she gets just enough to survive for her children, and to buy, this produce from what turns out to be a middleman. And so Jessica says, well, why don't you go to the original, to the farmers, to the people that actually, sell this originally? You'd make a far better profit. She said, yeah, absolutely. I just cannot afford to leave my post to go do that. And so Jessica's looking at this, and she said, well, how much would it cost for you to make the transition? She said $500, which of course isn't a huge amount in the developed world. And she said she had that thought. She's like, well, I could just get $500 and give it to her, and I would help her, and that would matter. But instead, she built what eventually became, she and others built what eventually became Kiva, kiva.org, where that money wasn't just a microloan once. It wasn't just a loan or a gift. It was a microloan that didn't just get paid back once, but gets reinvested, and then other people could start it as well. She built a system that produced residual results to the order of like $1.3 billion now of loans, which are still being reloaned. People repay it. About 97% of these loans are repaid. She could have given $500. She built something that produced results that flowed to the other people she wanted to help. And now $1.3 billion later. That's the difference between a linear result and a residual result. And to me, it's an absolutely massive opportunity. And my test in my life, and for you too, is where are the systems of my life developed, and where is it just me doing it again and again? Yeah. Like, how much of the results are you getting is just you pushing, making it happen, versus I have built a system that produces results for me. And I use, a little harshly, but I use the death test for this, which is like, okay, so if I die today, which things continue?
Yeah. Which
things could continue without me? And to start having a vision, I just had a conversation with a friend yesterday. I don't even think that he's fully human, this guy. The way he talks, the way he thinks, and the systems he's created have like blown my mind. He talks like this, this is like in one sentence, he's like, yeah, I'm just trying to build, I'm trying to invest for like the next 500 years. That's really my vision point. And I've created a family bank that can be in existence for the next 500 years. So that, and in the documents he sent me this 50-page document called The Rhythm of Experience. And it's his system for how he's trying to, he makes sure that his life is in flow all the time. And it just puts me to shame listening to all this and learning all this. I think so much of what I'm doing is still 1 ounce of effort to get one result, instead of thinking and building stuff that just continually, perennially, perpetually almost eternally could be producing results and coming back and back. So this to me is actually probably the single most exciting idea in Effortless, and how powerful it can become.
I think, behaviors, this is, I think, one of the common myths about behavior change. People say, behavior change is so hard, it's so difficult to change habits, whatever. The truth is we're changing all the time. One of the primary functions of your brain is to change your behavior whenever the environment shifts or whenever the context shifts. So you're very capable of change, and you're kind of doing it constantly. However, in order to change in an intentional way, in order to be in control of that change and not just having it happen to you, I think you have to start with some kind of awareness. So the point that you just made about the book is actually about self-awareness. It's actually about understanding yourself better. It's actually about seeing some of the behaviors that you're usually blind to. That I feel like is an essential first step if you want to be in control of that process in any way. A lot of people feel like they're the victim of their habits, but I think if you want to become the architect of them, you need to have some kind of self-awareness. You need to be able to identify, what am I actually doing right now? What is the truth of this situation? And where do I want to go? What is the truth of what I want to become or want to achieve? And then you can start to bridge that gap once you have a better, clearer understanding of where you currently stand and where you want to go.
Is there an argument that we shouldn't use the term good and bad when it comes to habits? Now, I get it. Most of us would consider, I don't know, moving our bodies more, in inverted commas, good habits. But you describe so beautifully how all behaviors really are playing a role in our lives in some way. And in some ways, assigning good and bad to them might be, layering on a level of judgment, which can often actually get people even more stuck. So I wonder if you can unpack that a little bit for us.
Yeah, you can sort of twist this either way. Like on the one hand, I do think there's an argument for just saying, listen, there aren't really good or bad habits. There are effective habits in the sense that they are effective at solving the problem that you're facing in that moment. And having some additional layer of judgment or feeling guilty about that probably isn't serving you. It's not really helping you move forward. So maybe we could dismiss that. On the other hand, I think we all sort of implicitly understand what we're saying when we say it's a good habit or a bad habit. But I have wrestled with this a little bit more because there are some academics or some researchers who kind of adamantly say that there is no such thing as a good or a bad habit. And here's where I've come down on it. Pretty much all behaviors in life produce multiple outcomes across time. So broadly speaking, let's say there's an immediate outcome and there's an ultimate outcome. And with your bad habits, or things that we commonly call a bad habit, usually the immediate outcome is favorable. Like the immediate outcome of eating a donut is great. It's sweet, it's sugary, it's tasty, it's enjoyable. It's only the ultimate outcome a year or 2 years from now, or if you keep eating donuts, that's unfavorable. With a good habit, or something we commonly call a good habit, like say going to the gym, the immediate outcome is often kind of unfavorable. Like the immediate outcome of going to the gym for the first week is your body looks the same in the mirror. The scale hasn't changed. If anything, you're a little bit sore. It's only the ultimate outcome, a year or 2 or 5 later, that is favorable. And I think, first of all, I feel like this is an important point for a couple of reasons. First, it helps explain a little bit why we continue to repeat habits that we consider to be bad for us. The reason is because they serve you in the moment. Even something like smoking a cigarette, the immediate outcome might be that you get to socialize with friends outside the office, or you curb your nicotine craving. It's only the ultimate outcome that is unfavorable. And we tend to have brains that are wired for immediate returns. And that makes sense from an evolutionary standpoint. Like you would rather have a brain that takes shelter from a storm now than one that doesn't. You would rather have a brain that prioritizes getting the next meal than giving equal weight to a meal that you might have in 2 weeks. Yeah. And so it serves us usually to be immediately focused. But in modern society, it comes back to hurt us a little bit when it comes to a lot of these bad habits. With good habits, however, it's a lot about finding ways to delay gratification or to pull the long-term rewards of those good habits into the present moment so that you feel good right now. In in ancient history or in prehistory, our ancestors largely grew up in environments that were immediately focused. Like I said, taking shelter from a storm or getting the next meal or something like that, avoiding predators. But modern society has become increasingly focused on delayed rewards. You go to school now so that you can graduate in a few years. You show up at work this week so that you can get a paycheck in a month. You save for retirement now so that you can have financial security a decade or 2 or 3 from now. And so modern society asks us to make more delayed return decisions than our ancestors did. And so I think we have a little bit of friction with a lot of the good habits that we want to build are more delayed than what maybe our biological underpinnings are wired for. So there's a little bit of a challenge there. But I think the summary of this is that if I were to define what is a good habit, what is a bad habit, I would say the cost of your good habits are in the present. The cost of your bad habits are in the future. And it's really that gap between immediate outcome and ultimate outcome that I think helps define what is good or bad. Your good habits are the ones that serve you in the long run. Your bad habits are the ones that don't serve you well in the long run. And that I think is maybe a simplistic way of viewing it, but it kind of gives us a clean division for how most of us actually use the word in conversation.
Yeah, I really like that. And I think I think the way you've come down there is really helpful, because I think sometimes we can, in science and academia, sort of get a bit lost sometimes in terms of what technically is something, how can we define it? And of course, I understand the value in that, but it also has to be translated for the layman in terms of, well, what does that mean for me?
There's value in being precise, but there's more value in being useful. And so I would rather have a useful definition than a precise one. This is maybe one example of that.
Hey, you're preaching to the converted, and I'm all for things like that. It's about, you wrote a book, you come up with these concepts, you write. I've got to say, I want to talk about your newsletter at some point. It is just a brilliant newsletter. And guys,
thank you.
I would encourage anyone to sign up for it. The 321 newsletter. It's one that I read on most weeks. I won't say I read it every week, because I don't, but I see it every week, and I read them more than...
I'm just happy that you're showing up at all, man. I think it's great. Thank you.
No, and I actually don't know how you produce that level of content on a weekly basis. You must have some... In fact, let's go there now. You must have some pretty good habits or systems in place to produce such high quality output on a weekly basis. So I wonder if you're able to share some of them.
Thank you for saying that. Pretty much every thought we have is downstream from what we consume. And so I think the first step for me is trying to choose good pieces of information to consume. Almost all of my, reading is kind of like fuel for me. The way that I think about it is, I had this little challenge, challenging point in my career where after about a year or two, my audience had started growing, and I thought, oh, people are paying attention now. Now I need to be really good, And so I thought, well, if I just spend more time writing, then that's how I can make it even better. I'd need to put more effort in. But actually, I think it ended up making it worse, because what I didn't realize is that if I don't have good ideas to write about, I don't need to write more. I need to read more. And so it's kind of like driving a car, and reading is like filling up the tank with gas. And writing is like going on an adventure and going on a journey and getting somewhere. And the point of having a car is not to just stay at the gas station and fill it up with gas all day. Like, you're supposed to actually go somewhere. So if you only consume, that's not beneficial. But if all you do is try to drive and put stuff out, then at some point you run out of gas. And so I need a balance between the two. I get that in a couple different ways. Trying to select good books to read, of course, is a big part of that. But I've found Twitter to be really useful. I've spent what probably would be considered an unreasonable amount of time curating my Twitter feed. And I would say it might be over 100 hours at this point that I've spent looking at different profiles. Should I follow this person or not? What about people I really like? Who do they follow? And just kind of doing this endlessly, over and over again. I sort of do this kind of, it's like bulking and then cutting basically, but for Twitter. So I kind of bulk up and add 100 accounts that I'm going to follow. And then I sit with that for a couple weeks, and then I cut again and, only keep the ones that are really useful, really high signal, low noise. But the end result of that is that essentially I'm crafting my information flow. because I log in there, for an hour or two every day, and that's determining what I'm seeing in my timeline, what's popping up in my feed. And I would say at this point, every day I probably get at least 3 ideas from my Twitter feed, probably more, that I take notes on and maybe spark me to go read something more, go down a rabbit hole or something like that. So I really feel like that's probably the most important part in my process, is crafting information flows and figuring out what to read. And then the ideas sort of bubble up naturally when you're getting that much inspiration. I have more practical or tactical stuff. Like we have a big spreadsheet that I keep where I dump all of my ideas into it, and I dump any interesting quotes I have into it. And eventually those, we go back through those and I select my favorites, and those kind of make it into the newsletter. So there's sort of like an additional round of curation that goes on. But I do think reading is probably the most important part of the process.
Yeah, what's interesting about that for me, James, is we started off this conversation talking about our social environments, and we're quite we've kind of evolved it into your social media environments, which certainly is part of our social environment. The way humans now live and consume information and interact with people is done online. A lot of it's done online, a lot of it's done through social media. And I really like that idea. I've been sort of talking on my Instagram, as it happens, about this for a while to people. Say, look, you've really got to take control over who you're following. The way you're going to think, your ideas of the world, but also how you feel. Like if you're struggling with stress and anxiety, I sort of think, well, are you following people who make you feel more stressed, make you feel more anxious, whose whole persona is on calling other people out, and then therefore it's going to be a whole divisive type of feed you're following? Or do you want to spend time following, people who make you feel good, positive, compassionate, whatever it is you want? It's not for me to say what people should or shouldn't follow. I guess you found what you need from Twitter, and you've not just left it up to chance, which kind of goes to your central theme in the book as well, which is about, we're results of the habits we're following, but half the time we don't even know that these are habits that we've been actually following until we shine a light on it. And it's the same principle that you're using with Twitter, right? You're being really intentional about who you're following. But would you recommend, given how important our environment and what we surround ourselves with is, would you almost say that that is something that all of us should be considering when we go online?
Oh, I think so. When you choose the people that you follow online, you are sort of like, it's like you get to pick the citizens for your own little city. You're getting to create that, and you want to be very careful about who you let into your city, about who you're allowing to be part of that information flow, because essentially what you're choosing is you're choosing the people who are shaping your thoughts. And that's one of the most important choices that you can make. So I agree with you. I think a lot of the time behavior on social media is somewhat mindless. We follow someone because we've been following them for a long time, and we, look at their posts because we always look at their posts when we log into Instagram or Twitter or wherever. And we don't really think carefully, does this actually benefit me? Like, is this giving me good things to think about? Do I feel better about myself after I look at this? I had one friend who, she told me, she was like, I just deleted Instagram because I felt worse about myself after I logged in every time. And it took her a while to realize that. And I don't think that's necessary. I mean, I have an Instagram account, but I do think that you need to be careful about who you follow. So curating that is a big part of, you're not only choosing who to follow, you're choosing what your future self will think. And you want to make sure that you're giving yourself the opportunity to have good future thoughts.
Yeah. I don't know if you've seen The Social Dilemma that's come out recently on Netflix.
I haven't seen it, but I know Tristan and have been familiar with his work for a little while.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly think it's one of the most important documentaries I've seen in a long time. It definitely warranted me plugging in, waiting for the box to load for 5 minutes before I could press play on that. But it really has made me think. And, we've not spoken about identity yet, and I really want to get into that. But what was interesting about the social media algorithms and the way they were explaining it in the documentary is that they're actually changing the way that we think, and therefore changing the way that we behave. And if we really take that put that at the forefront of our minds, if the people you follow and the algorithms, which are then tracking that and then feeding you more content, have the potential to change how you think and then how you behave, well, what could be more important than curating your online world intentionally? One thing I was doing before, I think it makes a difference. On Instagram, when you follow someone, you can actually go in and actually add them to a close friends list. And that's what I started doing. Maybe there's 10 or 20 people. They're not all close friends, but I've added them to close friends list because I'm like, I really like these people's content. I actually want to see their content when they post it. And that's again, it's just another practical thing that I think it helps people take control a little bit.
Yeah, I would agree. It's choosing information flows, social media being probably one of the primary ones for all of us, is a huge, crucial thing for kind of shaping your future thoughts.
Now, Jason, but you've got these 4 laws, these 4 laws of change, of behavior change, I guess. And I wonder if we could go through them. I guess we've touched on a couple of them in sort of passing so far. But before we start that, I wonder if you could define what a habit is, what an atomic habit is, and then we can maybe sort of expand upon these 4 laws.
So there are a couple different definitions of a habit. The one that's most common or is something to the effect of a habit is a behavior that you've repeated enough times to be more or less automatic, or, it's something fairly mindless, automatic routine behavior. So brushing your teeth, tying your shoes, unplugging the toaster after each use, like you just kind of do these things automatically. They take 30 seconds or a minute, or, they're pretty quick. There are some other ways to define a habit, though, and I like to use some of these alternate definitions because I think it helps reveal a little bit more nuance about what habits are and where they live in our lives. So, for example, another way to define a habit is it's a behavior that is repeated in a particular context. So you start to realize that the environment matters a lot in habits. Like your couch at 7 p.m. might be where you watch Netflix. And so it's actually the behavior of watching Netflix is tied to that context. If you're somewhere else at 7 p.m., then you probably won't perform that same habit. And so you start to realize how much your behavior is linked to the environment or the circumstance around you. A third definition of a habit, which I really like, Jason Rea, who's a behavioral scientist, he has something where he says something to the effect of habits are solutions to recurring problems in your environment. And what I like about that is it speaks to habits serve a purpose. They are effective at solving some kind of problem. And if you start to unpack that a little bit more, you see that there can be quite a variety in the habits that people build. For example, you finish the workday and it's like 6 p.m. and you're exhausted and tired from a long day of work. Well, in a sense, that's a problem that your brain needs to solve. And one person might solve that problem by playing video games for an hour. And another person might solve it by smoking a cigarette. And a third person might solve it by going for a run. And you can see pretty quickly that there are some solutions that are more effective or optimal or healthy than others. And I think the question to ask yourself, early on when you're a child, you inherit these solutions. You kind of inherit, you soak up the habits that you see role modeled by your parents or your friends or whatever experiences that you happen to have in your narrow sliver of the universe. But what are the odds that the habits that you inherited from your childhood, the experiences you had and the things that you saw done are also the optimal solution to the problems that you face?
Yeah.
It's very unlikely that whatever you happen to stumble across is actually the optimal way to do it. And if you realize that, then you come to discover that as you become an adult and you're more in control of your habits and your environment, it becomes your responsibility to assess what are the problems and challenges I face repeatedly, the things that I'm trying to solve, and what would be a better way to do that? What are the optimal solutions? So it's not your fault if you inherited unhelpful habits or unproductive habits, but it is your responsibility to try to figure out how to adjust those and how to improve those in some meaningful way.
Yeah.
All right. So that's kind of my long definition of what is a habit. Now, what is an atomic habit? I use the phrase atomic because I think it has three meanings, and all three kind of apply to building better habits. So the first meaning of the word atomic is tiny or small, like an atom. And that is part of my philosophy. Habits should be small and easy to do and not very difficult and convenient. The second meaning of the word atomic is the fundamental unit in a larger system. So atoms build into molecules, molecules build into compounds, and so on. And we mentioned this earlier, but your habits are kind of like the fundamental unit of the overall system that you run. Each one's like a little gear in the overall machine. And collectively, you put all those little units together and you end up with your daily routine or your lifestyle. And then the third and final meaning of the word atomic is the source of immense energy or power. And I think that if you combine all three of those meanings, you make changes that are small and easy to do, and you layer them together like units in a larger system, you can end up with some really powerful results. And those three kind of different meanings of atomic, I think if you apply those to building better habits, you can end up with a really powerful system of better habits and behaviors. And so that's kind of where the phrase atomic habit came from and how I feel or think about using it in that context.
Yeah. Wow. No, thanks for that. Really useful way to think about habits. So trying to think about habits through the lens of health, let's say, meditation is a habit. So I should say meditation is a practice that many people struggle to do consistently. Many people have the desired outcome of, I want to meditate, I want to be a meditator. I read about all these benefits, but I just can't do it. And I wonder if it might be useful to try and unpick why it's difficult, but through the lens of those 4 laws. I wonder if you'd be game for that, to see if we can maybe to make it super practical for people.
Yeah, sure, of course. Let me just give a summary of the 4 laws first, and then we can kind of dive into using that example. So if you want to have it stick, you kind of roughly have 4 different things that if you can get them working for you, they're sort of like levers. And if they're in the right positions, building good habits is easier. And if they're in the wrong positions, you're kind of fighting an uphill battle. So the first thing is you want to make your habits obvious. Most habits are preceded by some kind of cue. And so you want the cues of your habits to be obvious, available, visible, easy to see. The easier it is to see or get your attention, the more likely you are to stick with the habit or perform it. The second one is to make your habits attractive. If you want your habits to be motivating, if you want them to be compelling, then you need it to be attractive in some form. The third law is to make it easy. So the easier, more convenient, frictionless your habits are, the more likely you are to perform them. We've talked a little bit about that with environment design already. Sure. And the fourth and final thing is you want to make it satisfying. So the more satisfying or enjoyable a habit is, the more likely you are to stick with it. Now, not every behavior in life is satisfying or rewarding, right? Sometimes things have a cost or a consequence. Sometimes they're fairly neutral. But if a behavior is not rewarding, if it's not enjoyable, at least to some degree, then it's unlikely to become a habit. It needs to have some kind of positive emotional signal associated with it that kind of tells your brain, hey, that felt good. You should repeat this again next time. So real quick summary, the 4 laws of behavior change: make it obvious, make it attractive, make it easy, make it satisfying. And I think that sort of gives you a high level framework for getting a good habit to stick. I'll just kind of make a note of this right here. We don't have to get into it in detail, but I do just want to mention it, which is those 4 help you build a good habit. If you want to break a bad habit, then you just invert those 4. So rather than making it obvious, you want to make it invisible, unsubscribe from emails, or reduce exposure to the cue. Rather than making it attractive, you want to make it unattractive. Making it easy, make it difficult, increase friction, add steps. Rather than making it satisfying, make it unsatisfying, add some kind of immediate cost or consequence to the behavior. So that's like the high level view for breaking a bad habit. And obviously the book goes into many more examples of like how to do each of those, but we can talk about how to apply it to meditation now.
Yeah. So someone's listening to this or watching it on YouTube and they go, right, okay, I'm bought in, going to get James's book. I'm going to start a meditation practice. Where should I begin? How would you advise them using your sort of framework of these laws?
So usually if I say, okay, we got to start in some place, what's the first thing I should do? I actually typically recommend what I call the 2-minute rule. And the 2-minute rule is part of that third law, which is making it easy. And the 2-minute rule says take whatever habit you're trying to build and scale it down to something that takes 2 minutes or less to do. So do yoga 4 days a week becomes take out my yoga mat, or meditate for 15 minutes a day becomes meditate for 2 minutes. And sometimes I say that and people resist it a little bit because they're like, okay, I know the real goal isn't just to take my yoga mat out, right? And I know I'm actually trying to do the workout. So this is some kind of mental trick. And like, why would I fall for it, basically? And I get where people are coming from. But so I have this reader, his name's Mitch, and he lost a bunch of weight, kept it off for over a decade. But for the first 6 weeks that he went to the gym, he had a rule for himself where he wasn't allowed to stay for longer than 5 minutes. So he'd get in the car, drive to the gym, get out, do half an exercise, get back in the car, drive home. And it sounds ridiculous, right? It sounds silly. You're like, obviously, this is not going to get the guy the results that he wants. But if you take a step back, what you realize is that he was mastering the art of showing up, right? He was becoming the type of person that went to the gym 4 days a week, even if it was only for 5 minutes. And I think this is a much deeper truth about habits that often gets overlooked, which is a habit must be established before it can be improved, right? It has to become the standard in your life before you can optimize and scale it up. And for whatever reason, we get very all or nothing with our habits. It's like I have to find the perfect workout program or the ideal business plan or the best diet to follow before I can take a first step. And I can imagine in this meditation example, there are probably many people who are like, well, what is the best form of meditation? Like that would be one of the first things they would ask themselves. Then they'd spend hours researching on YouTube and whatever. And, a lot of the time we put off action because we think I need to learn more, but usually the best way to learn is by taking action. And so the 2-minute rule kind of helps you overcome that tendency to have this like perfectionist spiral and research too much and encourages you to just get started. So I think that's step number one is let's take meditation and let's just scale it down to something you can always do. We're just going to meditate for, say, 60 seconds. And then we can start to apply some of the other laws. So let's say we've got the first law, make it obvious. Well, there are a couple different things that you could make meditation obvious. You could, if you're going to do it on your phone, if you're going to download one of the meditation apps like Calm or Waking Up or Headspace or something like that, you could take that app and put it on the home screen, the way that I mentioned earlier in this interview about moving Audible there. So you can make it the most obvious app on your phone. If you don't care about that, or you're just going to do it like in your house or in a room or something, you need to figure out where is that going to occur. So this is something I mentioned in the book. I think it's in chapter 5. I talk about implementation intentions. And implementation intentions are when you state your intention to implement a particular behavior at a certain time, in a certain place, on a certain day. So it's like, when do I meditate? I meditate on Mondays at 7 a.m. in my guest room or whatever. You have to have a space where that actually happens. And maybe you have a meditation pillow. So you set that up and that's all, the environment, the space is primed. It could be just in the corner of your living room or something, but there needs to be some space where that habit lives. And it's very clear when and where to do it. A lot of people feel like what they lack is motivation, but what they really lack is clarity. They lack a very clear understanding of when and where the habit's going to live. So honestly, I think just those two things. So that's the first law, make it obvious, deciding when and where it's going to occur. And the third law, make it easy, scaling it down and just doing it for 60 seconds or 2 minutes or whatever. Those two things alone would go a long way in getting people to stick with a new meditation habit.
Yeah, that's really, really helpful, James. And I just want to share with you a patient story from, I'm going to guess 7-8 years ago. And, I've often said this, but as a medical doctor, I can definitely put my hands up and say very clearly that my patients have taught me a lot more than I taught them. Because I often say this when I'm teaching doctors as well, really listen to your patients, listen to what they're telling you. They will often tell you why something's working, why it's not working. And one thing I've observed, I've been really curious as to why does the same advice work for one patient and not work for another patient? Why does one patient go with that and sort of implement it all and come back like a different person, literally a different person, not just different health, a different person, which we'll also talk about. And why does someone else really, really struggle? I remember this case, this lady who I think stress and chronic unremitting stress was driving a lot of her symptoms, her headaches, her insomnia, her mood issues. And we tried all kinds of things. And she actually wanted to meditate, but she said, she tried before, but when I sort of probed her a little bit, she said, it's just not for me, Doc. I've tried it. I've tried the apps. I've tried YouTube videos. It's just not for me. And when you probed, when I sort of delved a bit deeper, she'd actually made it really hard. She wanted to do 20 minutes consistently. And because she hadn't met that bar, she, in her head, is not a meditator. So I said to her, hey, look, what do you think you could commit to every day? Could you do 10 minutes? She goes, no, I could try, but I don't think so. I said, okay, how about 5? She thought about it. She said, I don't know. I said, okay, how about 1 minute? She said, well, yeah, I could do 1 minute, but will it make any difference? I said, well, hold on a minute. Let's just make a commitment here, right? And actually, it's a lot younger as a doctor back then. And I said to her, I tell you what, whatever you commit to doing, I will also do it. I write it in a diary. And when you come back to see me next week, we'll compare, right? So I added that sort of accountability piece with her. But she started off doing 1 minute. And we also defined when she was going to do it. It was going to be first thing in the morning before she did anything else. That 1 minute, after a couple of weeks became 5 minutes, not because I asked her to, but because she, as you would say, she was mastering the art of showing up. I didn't know how to articulate it. I didn't know the science of behavior change back then. I was sort of just going on intuition as a clinician. How can I help that lady do what she tells me she wants to do? And now she's meditating for 20 minutes a day, locked in, right? And so if anyone is skeptical about your 2-minute rule, I would sort of concur as a clinician that this stuff works, you just got to commit to it, right?
One of the most motivating feelings for the human mind is the feeling of progress.
Yeah.
If you're making progress, you have every reason in the world to continue. It's like, oh, we're moving forward. I'm making progress on the goal that I'm hoping to achieve. And so there's this weird trick that we can play on ourselves in our brain where we're like, well, I want to meditate for 20 minutes. And if she would have done it for 1 minute, she would have felt like a failure if that was her expectation, right? But somehow, just by shifting it and saying, no, I'm only going to try to do this for 1 minute. If she does it for 2 minutes, she feels like she crushed it, And so it's this very strange thing. And I think that's a good argument for, especially in the beginning, starting with keeping the bar low, and you need to get in your reps. And this is true, I think, for almost any kind of habit that you're building. Like, you need the repetitions, whether it's meditating for 1 minute or writing 1 sentence or reading 1 page. It doesn't matter that it's almost always better to do less than you had hoped than to do nothing at all. And the 2-minute rule kind of helps nudge you toward that direction, nudge you toward the direction of getting in your reps, getting it done, and mastering the art of showing up, even if it's in a small way, and then using that as a foothold to advance to the next level and kind of build some momentum and get that feeling of progress.
Yeah. Now you sort of frame that with 2 of the 4 laws. I really like the 4th law, make it satisfying. What are some of the ways that people can make things satisfying? As you were talking about before, how can you, often the problem is with good habits, or, in inverted commas, good habits, the problem often is the desired effect is somewhere in the future. Right. So how can people bring that into the present?
Well, I think the ultimate form of a reward is feeling like you're showing up as the type of person that you want to be, that it's reinforcing your desired identity. But as you mentioned, the problem is it takes a long time for that to be true. Like, the first time you meditate, you don't identify as I'm a meditator and it feels good to do this because that's part of who I am and part of my identity. It might take you a year or 2 or who knows how long before you actually start to adopt that feeling. I mean, I didn't identify as an author until I actually had a published book. Like, even when I was writing it, I didn't feel like I was an author. So that can take a long time. I think the key, though, is that, in my opinion, there are kind of 2 things. One, you want some kind of a reward that is immediate. And I think the speed of it is actually quite important. You need to feel that positive emotional signal right away so that you have a reason to tie that behavior to feeling good, and you have a reason to repeat it again in the future when the same situation arises. So there are a couple different ways you can do this. One very simple way that applies to almost any habit is to use a habit tracker. So I'd like to use my dad as an example here. So both of my parents like to swim. But one of the challenges with swimming is that your body looks exactly the same when you get out of the water as it does when you jumped in. And so you have no evidence that that workout was worth it, right? You have no evidence that this is actually getting you what you want. And so what my dad does is after each workout, he pulls out a little calendar and he puts an X on that day. And it's a small thing, but that X in the moment is something that matches the frequency of the habit. Every time he swims, he also gets to put an X down. And it gives him a signal of visual progress. We just mentioned that progress is one of the most motivating feelings for the human mind. You need to have some way to visualize that, some way to see that you're progressing. Because if you can't see the change in your body or there's no change on the scale yet, you need something else that says, hey, that was the right thing to do. This feels good to show up and do the thing I want to do. So a habit tracker is one very simple one. The other thing, though, and people talk about external rewards all the time. And so, like, oh, I went to the gym, and so I'm going to reward myself by getting an ice cream cone or something. But my little nuance or argument here is I think you want to choose external rewards that align with the internal identity that you're trying to build. So if you reward yourself for going to the gym by getting an ice cream cone, that's kind of like casting votes for two different identities. Like on the one hand, you're casting a vote for being a healthy person. On the other hand, you're casting a vote for eating ice cream or whatever. So instead, you could do something like reward yourself, any week when you don't miss a workout, you reward yourself with a bubble bath at the end of the week. And that's sort of like an external reward that also is a vote for taking care of your body. And so that kind of aligns with that identity that you're trying to build through working out. Or say any month that you hit your target of saving for retirement. Some people might say, oh, well, you could reward yourself by buying a leather jacket, but that doesn't really align with the financial saving mentality you're trying to build. So instead, I would say, well, any month that you hit that target, you could reward yourself with, say, a free hour where you get to take a walk in the park or free time to do whatever you want. Because really what you're trying to get to with retirement is freedom. And so you're kind of aligning with that same internal identity that you're trying to build. But I do think that the faster, so the immediacy part, the faster you can get a positive reward, that's a really powerful thing. And the more that your external rewards can align with the internal identity you're trying to build, that's an important thing to keep in mind as well.
Yeah, I mean, we at home use tick charts on the wall to try and get that sort of progress going. So my wife, me, my two kids, we've all got a tick chart on the wall. We've chosen, this is basically what my last book was about, where we've chosen a mind, body, and heart health snack a day. So something for your mental health, something for your physical health, something for your emotional health. They all take under 5 minutes, and my kids do them initially, at least, to get their tick, right? So that was actually the motivator for them to do it. And I think what you said there about the speed at which you get the reward, I think that's really important, because I found that often the kids, sometimes if they would forget to put their tick, and I say, oh, you can do it at the end of the day when you're back from school, you can put your ticks on, you start to lose the connection, right, between behavior and reward. And I wonder for you, James, like I've heard you say in a previous interview that, when you send out your weekly newsletter, within an hour you're starting to get replies and you're getting that feedback. So you've got that loop going. Oh, I've done something. I start to hear and experience how that's impacting people. How did that go for you when you were writing a book, which obviously takes a long time, and you're not getting that immediate reward? Did that make it harder to stay focused and to stay motivated?
Definitely. I think, sort of the topic that we're kind of circling right now is basically like immediate feedback, or having feedback loops in your behavior and how those influence your actions. And so you're right, whether you post a tweet and you kind of start seeing likes trickle in, within the first few minutes, or whether you send out a newsletter in my case and you get replies within an hour, those feedback loops are very fast and very motivating, because it feels good to get that, to get those signals of feedback, those signals of progress. And that's enough to get me to show up again the next day and like, let's work on next week's article, or let's work on the next tweet, or whatever. But with writing a book, the feedback loop is so long. One of the great challenges of writing a book is you sit down and work on something. It's this huge manuscript, 200 pages, 300 pages, whatever. and it's a total mess, and you work hard for 8 hours and it's just as much of a mess as when you started. There's nothing, and you have to continue to do that for like 2 years before it actually turns into something and like starts to congeal and clarify itself. And I didn't realize that that was going to be such a challenge for me because Atomic Habits was my first book. But when I was in the middle of it, it was very hard. And I don't need 1 million people to read my work when I'm working on it, but I do need somebody to give me some feedback and say, hey, you're on the right path. And so eventually the way that I solved that was by hiring an editor to send drafts to and just get a little bit of feedback from them and, iterate on my ideas. And that was really crucial because that first year was very hard for me. I felt like I was kind of lost. I have another point that I want to add to this kind of feedback loop conversation.
Sure.
And it came up when you were mentioning something a minute ago. This is true. It's feedback loops like that are powerful. Immediate feedback is powerful, not only for solidifying good habits, for kind of making us feel motivated and getting these signals of progress, but it also will curtail bad behavior if you have a very immediate consequence or punishment to the behavior. So 2 of my favorite examples, Danella Meadows, was a great systems thinker and engineer. She had an idea where she said, if we want to reduce pollution, any manufacturing facility that produces waste and lets the wastewater out into the river, they should be required to take up water for their facility downstream, so that the very first place that feels the effects of the pollution is the place that is producing it. Yeah. Another one that I really liked, apparently Boeing, when they were working on their planes and they first made the switch, I think this is in the 1990s, when they first made the switch from a fully manual wing to one that was fully software driven, the engineers who designed the software were required to be on the first test flight. And it's partially that's because they wanted to test some things, but it's such a great alignment of incentives. You better get this right because you're going to be the one who pays the cost. And those are 2 just beautiful examples of immediate feedback loops, in this case, an immediate consequence. And the faster that consequence or reward is delivered, the more immediately it's associated with a behavior, the more likely it is the behavior is going to change. And this is something in Atomic Habits, I refer to this as the cardinal rule of behavior change, which is behaviors that are immediately rewarded get repeated. Behaviors that are immediately punished get avoided. And it's really the speed that is kind of the key factor there.
If you enjoyed that conversation, I think you are really going to enjoy the one I had with the former monk, Jay Shetty, on the simple things that you can do to train your mind. It's right there. Give it a listen and let me know what you think.
The monk mindset is about pursuing your truest goals, your truest self, and your most authentic, aligned goals.